Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil FAQ video. Today we've got Season 6 FAQ number 1. We hope to do a whole bunch of these. We're just now getting to the content, but we're gonna start doing a whole bunch more FAQs for Season 6 as we're trying lots of new stuff. So please load me up with questions. As per usual, Dean has sent over all of the questions from YouTube, and Dave printed them out, gave them to me. I've not looked at them at all, and so this will be fresh from the top. I'll do my best to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'm gonna tell you that. Let's get going. All right, Jonathan's got the first question. Do you remove the root ball out of, say, like a 3x3 bed after harvest before putting more babies in there? I'm thinking about putting a bed in my tent. It's a great idea, and as far as the root balls go, you don't have to. You can do either way, okay? It's totally up to you. Let's say you had a 3x3 with 9 plants in it. When you're done, there was 9 stalks. Most of the time, after a short while, the worms and all the life in there and the moisture, it's pretty easy after a week or two to take the stalk and twist it and just pop them right out. And I leave all of the root mass in there. And a lot of times I'll just kind of move the dirt and plant right back on top or right next to it. But with 9 different spacings, that's a lot of stalk. And so I do recommend removing it. However, let's say you only had 4. A lot of times you could literally just leave the stalk intact from where you harvested it, and you could plant next to it and not disturb anything. So it's up to you. The main reason why people have this question is many of us have grown in a smaller container in, let's say, regular like Pro Mix or Coco Core, what they call soilless, and so we'll be feeding them. And when you're feeding plants, the root system go crazy, and they have to have lots of roots to be able to absorb all these liquid nutrients at such an efficiency level. Where in living soil, the relationships with the biology and then the way that the roots work, it doesn't seem to be like such a matting of root to be able to produce such a large plant. And so in a smaller container, it can still happen. But the visual, when you're harvesting, you're like, well, how would I ever grow back in here? It's solid roots. In a 3x3 bed, it's not solid roots. And all of those decaying roots are actually pathways for microorganisms, for moisture to move through. The worms eat them, they feed the biology. So I do not remove the root ball, and that's why. Hopefully that answers your question. Elite Element says, if I have an 8-week flower strain, do you think a top dressing in week 1 and 4 for flower is good enough? In a 30-liter fabric pot with living soil, every 2 weeks I give compost tea. So top dressing, there's a couple of considerations. I just feel like a big top dressing right before is more than enough. Now in a small container, you said 30-liter, like 7 gallons or something, so that's not that big. You might have to top dress a second time. So week 1 and week 4 would be fine. I almost think that if you do it like before week 1, like 1 week before you flip, and then do it at like week 3 when you're finishing that stretch, you're more likely to be able to take advantage of those top dresses. Some will trickle through when you water in, so don't be scared to do it. But I would try and get it a week before and then maybe a few weeks in. The next thing that I would consider, we're gonna be writing feed schedules because I realize that our feed schedule is kind of complicated, but it's more a set of principles that we expect people to adapt to their situation. And we're gonna spend some time writing up the protocol, so to speak, for each scenario. And when you're in a small container, you're trying to do more with less. And so we're gonna have to top dress or feed a little bit more, and it's important to be aware of that. As far as 2 weeks giving a compost tea, you could do it every week, you could do it every day. Plants love the compost tea, it's just kind of a lot of work to make them, but in a small container, they work really, really well to keep nutrients in flow. Even just the biology as it dies become nutrients. So compost teas in small containers work really, really well, and that'll be part of the program. The other hack though is to go with the classic. The BuildASoil classic method is to use a 15-gallon or larger container, and it makes no-tilling easier, and it makes guessing on how much to top dress and feed a little bit easier. We're gonna do a full write-up on the classic method as well as the more with less method, and we'll make sure that those are shareable in the next few weeks, so hopefully that will help you. Next question, so Eric says, first time I just found a cricket in my soil. What do? I lost it in the grow. I've always had crickets in there. I don't know how they find their way in the tent. I just leave them. Of course, there's been a few times where one's driving me crazy and I seek it out and try and get rid of it, but for the most part, they've never really caused a problem. I just think that they like the moist, damp soil, and they find their way into like the pockets where the tent flaps are, and they kind of hang out and make noise. If you notice an explosion of them, might be a problem, but a couple crickets, like it's really not a big deal. We're gardening, so it doesn't need to be sterile. And I feel like a lot of people think of like sterility, white lab coats, pHing, chemicals, where I feel like crickets, worms, all that, pretty normal. So no big deal. Don't worry about losing it. If you find it later, cool, get rid of it. If not, doesn't really matter. I've never had them affect my flowers or anything. Next question, GPB. GPB says, if I buy a cubic yard of the 3.0, is the bag it comes in resealable? or can I store it without going bad? What is your recommended way to store it? That's a really good question. So soil took thousands of years to make. Obviously it took us a day to mix it, but we're talking lava rock and compost and things that take a long time to make. So it's not gonna go bad. What we want to avoid is getting rained on and leached out of all the nutrients. And the 1 yard sack that it comes in, it has a duffel top and it goes together and it has a strap around it that you can tie. You can certainly tie it and keep it like that and it'll be fine. When it warms up on top, it'll kind of condensate and the moisture will stay inside. But if you're gonna keep it in there for a long time, obviously keeping it away from the sun where it might make the plastic brittle over the years so you can continue to use it would be ideal. Mostly for just a few months or for a year, those super sacks are a totally great way to store it. And there's nothing special that you need to be aware of. Hopefully that answers your question. Jimbo says, hey, Jeremy, awesome video like always. I've read that the buds grow at night. Can you elaborate on this topic? How does this work with autos? If the lights are on 20 hours and only off for 4, it may be substantial growth day by day. They eat for 20 hours and stack for 4. Thanks for everything you do. This is a really good question. And so I'm not an expert on this subject, but I'm gonna give you a little insight. You can do some Googling. There are types of plants, and I believe cannabis is, I'm gonna get this wrong, but whatever. I believe it's a C4. And when you look up the way that the plants grow and how they utilize light, some plants absolutely have to have that downtime. Cannabis is not one of them. I don't believe it's growing at night at all. I believe that it's just dormant. But I'm gonna explain some of the processes that are a little more subtle that I think are important when it comes to light downtime. For a while, we would veg on 24 hours. And you'd notice the plants would sometimes get tired. Maybe it's just because they're going faster and so the days go faster and so it's harder to keep up with, but I feel like there's some magic to having the lights off. Same with autos. I feel like 20 hours with 4 hours of downtime is good, but it's not about the growth. To me, it's about the soil. When you're growing in soil, there's this relationship as above, so below, and the plants are pumping and they're growing, but they're also creating these root exudants that they'd like to feed to the soil so they can stimulate it and attract the right biology that'll release the nutrients, and there's this relationship happening. I feel like during those 4 hours of lights off, in your suggestion, that's where the plant kind of relaxes and it'll send its sugars back down into the soil, stimulate that biology to get the uptake ready for the next day. And it also gives it this this calendar day instead of everything just being one big day. And my gut tells me that's the best thing for them. The plants seem to be happier. And one thing I try to remember as we're going deeper into gardening and farming, there's tons of science, but most of it just points into answers we already know. Very important to trust your gut and trust the health of the plants. I find a little downtime is good, but they're not stacking at night, not in my opinion, because there's no light, there's no energy, they're just hanging out, doing their thing. So that's my opinion. I hope it helps answer your question, maybe makes you feel a little bit more comfortable about the night cycle. Next one, Vet Doc. Question, we tend to take PPFD measurements at the top of the canopy. Truth be told, the majority of the plant mass, solar panels, are below the top of canopy. Would it make any sense to take PAR measurements from lower, or perhaps take something like an average where even though the top is receiving a higher PAR, the majority of the leaves are receiving really a more adequate, appropriate PAR? Respectfully, Vet Doc. Vet Doc, really good question. I'm not an expert, so I'm gonna walk you through my process, how I think about this. What you're telling me makes sense. Only the top of the plant is where we're reading it. That's what the PAR truly is. Those lower ones aren't the same PAR. But I also believe the plant doesn't need to receive light on every leaf to get the energy. So as long as you're keeping things defoliated up below and you have a really good canopy up top, that's where it's gonna receive the light. And if there's some lights down lower with a lower PAR, that's fine. They're still gonna absorb as much as they can, but the entire plant can move energy around it. That sunlight is basically fueling up its entire tank. It doesn't matter where it's getting that from. Now, of course, if we put a plant and we're able to block it so it's half dark, half light, the one in the darkness is gonna grow really strange. But I do know that when there's availability of light, it's able to transfer that energy. Not all of the plant has to receive it. And so we do wanna focus on the canopy because the numbers that we're basing all best practices off of are based on that canopy because that's where it's easiest to get an accurate reading that's uniform. Of course, when you go down, it's gonna be lower. And so we based all of our best practices off those readings. You can definitely trick it and go higher, but sometimes you're gonna get some problems with them going a little too fast, nutrient issues, regardless of whether the plant down low has lower leaves or not. So focus on the top as far as best practices, and I think you'll be in the right spot. Next question, Organic 4484 says, you and the BuildASoil family have really been an inspiration for the at-home living soil grower. Thank you. You've changed the way I see living organics in a more simplified approach. My question is, how would you max out a 3x3 tent aiming for the best soil amount? I'm running a 320 watt AC bar LED inside my 3x3. This is a good question, we get it a lot. I'd say maxing out soil per area is all that matters. And then to you, it's up to your style. So, a couple considerations. A lot of times, like when I put a bed in there, I like to have a 4x4 bed and like a 5x5 tent. But a 3x3 is kind of small. The idea with that is that you get airflow around the sides. And if you need to reach into the tent, you have like a spot to put a foot or a hand and then get under there and train. But a 3x3, like you could max out a 3x3 bed, grassroots. They'll fit right inside a 3x3 tent. And that would be the best way to maximize the amount of soil that you can put in there. But consider this, in a 3x3, that's 9 square feet, okay? 9 square feet, 12 inches deep is 9 cubic feet of soil. Those grassroots beds are 18 inches deep. So you're getting 9 and another half of that. So 4.5 on top. So that's 13.5 cubic feet that you're getting in a 3x3 inside your tent. That's a lot of soil. That's like 100 gallons of soil per that 3x3 area. The other way that you could achieve the same amount is 4 25-gallon containers. That's 100 gallons. And now they're easily compartmentalizable without you having to move that whole bed in and out. And that might be better suitable to your lifestyle right now. Maybe you're like, F it, I'm just going with the bed. Do that. But we're talking about soil per canopy, okay? The other thing to consider is that when we're mapping that out and you're looking at your space, if you have room for a 4x4, 4 times 4 is 16 compared to 9. It's almost double for 1 more foot. Like, not much more footprint on the floor, a lot more soil holding capacity. So before you go all in, it might be worth looking at getting a slightly bigger tent, because the yield is not just off the soil, but the ability for it to fill out that canopy. And when we're in our 10x10, and I have a 4x4 bed, and it's got 5x5 of space to fill out, we've got side lighting, you just get really good yields. 3x3 with 100 gallons of soil though, you're going to smash it. You're gonna get good yields. So hopefully that works out. Some people do like dividing it up so that if they really want to, they can pull a plant out, put it back in. I like beds for what it's worth, so totally up to you. All right, let's see how many more. Got 3 more. Okay, Glue says, question, how much does one of the living soil beds weigh when full? I'm building out a grow room in my attic. Will be completely climate controlled, but I do have to haul everything up there and make sure the weight is supported. Definitely make sure the weight's supported. I know a lot of attics, you can have like furniture and all sorts of stuff up there, so it should be fine. The way to calculate it is to consider a few things. 1 cubic foot of soil, let's say weighs 40 pounds. Could be a little heavier depending on the amount of rock dust and which recipe you go with, but that's pretty generous. It might be a little less than that. And so if you feel like, if you look at that, a yard of soil is 200 gallons. Those are normally like 800 to 1,000 pounds. And so you can kind of do some multiplication. If you were to take 1 yard is 27, let's make it 25 to make it super easy. And they were 40 pounds each. Well, 25 times 40, what is that, 1,000 pounds? You get the idea. It's almost 1,000 pounds depending on how much soil you get up there. So what are you gonna say? The living soil bed depends on the size. So like that 4x4 bed is what I was getting at, is 16 square feet, and then it's 18 inches deep. So now you're getting 16 cubic feet plus another 8. That's 24 cubic feet of soil. That's almost 200 gallons, which means it could be like 800 pounds or something. And then if you actually add water to it, the next consideration is water's like 8 pounds a gallon. So if you've got 200 gallons and you hit it with 10% water, that's 20 gallons. That's 160 more pounds. So figure for 1,000 pounds and you'll probably be fine with that. But I just wanted to share that with you. Let's see, Chesapeake, next question. Love the channel, thank you. Any adverse effects of having your soil sit in the water of the autopot, or is that the best way to get the water up to the plant? Yeah, there can be adverse effects. So the Autopot XXL, it breathes really well. So there seems to be 0 adverse effects. I literally load it up, put it right in the water, and it stands in only about this much water, and it goes down and up as the dual valve works. So it seems to work really, really well. I did notice that the first time I used them, I was using their XLs, and it was hard plastic. And I do feel like you can get root rot. So Autopot's come up with some great suggestions for this. They tell you to put some lava rock, pumice, perlite in the bottom to keep the soil out of the water. They also have an air dome that blows air in there so you can stop it from getting anaerobic. But the short answer is, if you go with the Autopot XXL, the fabric container, you won't have any issue and it works really, really well. So I was surprised by that as well. And part of me trusted it because of the Earthbox, but the Earthbox has 2 wicking corners. So it's a little different, but it works surprisingly well. So next question, Craston says, another water question. For those of us that have to use RO water, do you have a recommendation on a good way to prepare it before giving it to the plants? I use some CalMag, but is there a better solution? I was considering substitute BAS freeze-dried coconut instead of CalMag for some of the waterings. I think you can add anything you want. Anything that you're willing to add to the water will add a little bit of mineral content to it. You could add RO water is not just a problem to me because it's got nothing in it. So let's cover that for the people that are wondering. RO water has been given a bad name from living soil growers. It's for two reasons. Number one is it's wasteful to make. You've got to first buy an expensive filtration system that goes hella slow. I mean, you can spend all the money and get a fast one, but most of the time with RO, you're having to fill up a tank. You can't just use it on demand. So now you got this tank that you're filling with water. It goes kind of slow. You got this expensive system, and depending on your RO setup, like half the water goes down the drain, and we're just wasting the water. And it like splits it into clean water and dirty water. And so most of us just don't want to do that because we don't have to. We're not in hydro. We can just use filtered water. We can crush it. And then to make it more like rainwater normally has carbonic acid in it, and it's normally slightly acidic, and it helps release nutrients. You can just add a little bit of ferment in there and call it a day. Filtered water, little ferment. But if you've got RO water, and let's say RO water was perfect, it just no waste. And so now it wasn't a waste stream issue. And let's say it was fast, easy to use, no waste, and it was cheap. Okay, well now it's like a filter. But the difference in filtered water and RO water when it comes out is the filtered water has a little bit of mineral left in it. And that's how nature works. Like it goes through the mountains, through the creeks, through everywhere before it gets into the actual location, or on the farm ground, a lot of times it's underground. So it's gonna be full of minerals as well. Knowing that, a lot of people give RO a bad name. There's a Kangen water machine that makes like acid and alkaline water, and the Japanese, they call it dead water, the RO water, and that's one of their advertising points for those machines. So people stay away from RO water. I think though that it's more just like it can be a little bit more, it can degrade things a little bit faster, like it wants to pull minerals, but in a living soil bed with no runoff, I really feel like RO water is probably totally fine. If you want to treat it with something, you can, but I wouldn't be scared to use RO. There should be plenty of calcium in your soil, and in fact, it should be able to release a little bit of it because of how it needs to pull. And what's so crazy is, even when I say that, it's funny. You can learn a lot about water, but I've got this book called The Fourth Phase of Water, and they're just now learning about some of the most interesting properties about water that we still don't understand. So I guess I don't feel too ignorant. Water's a pretty big subject, but personally, I don't think RO is the problem as far as the water. And I don't think you have to worry too much about adding stuff to it. Any of the BuildASoil products, little bits would probably be just fine to add something to your water. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you everyone for asking these questions. It makes it really fun to do these FAQs. I feel like you think of stuff that I don't think of because we're all seeing it from different perspectives, and that's super helpful. I hope that some of these questions help other people that weren't asking, and by that way, we can create this entire community where we all learn from each other. So thanks, please post up questions, and until next time, I'll see you on the next BuildASoil video.